So hello and welcome everybody to this live session, Meet the Makers, of the first day of this virtual IFC 2020. My name is Vaida. I'm from the Lithuanian radio in Vilnius, and I'm joined by the authors and producers of the documentaries that went online today on IFC websites. So it's Andrea in Italy, Isabel in Spain, Torben in Denmark, who will hopefully join us soon, Kasia in Poland, Michael in Ireland, Đino in Croatia, Stephen in the UK, and Emelie in Sweden. So thank you all very much for being here and for your inspiring work, which we can all hear and see with the subtitles online on the website. Some of the listeners may have managed to listen to those features and some not, and I hope that during the coming days you will do this. And I would also like to invite everyone very much to comment in the designated fields on the website to keep the IFC spirit alive, so to say, because discussions, constructive discussions about what motivates us in our work and how we do our work is very much at the heart of the IFC. And the plan is to spend this next 30 minutes chatting with the authors about the documentaries they made. And we should start with Andrea from Italy and his piece Braccio Cinco, if I pronounce it correctly. Yes, the Italian piece. Andrea is independent radio documentary producer, also conducting radio workshops and listening events. And as I understand, you're working also a lot with marginalized communities, not only in Italy, but also in other countries. And this program is a result of 2 months radio laboratory, which you and your colleagues curated, and in one of the oldest prisons in Rome, right?
Yeah, it's true.
Did you start this workshop with inmates knowing that this will become a radio documentary?
No, we were starting mainly, the focus was to use the radio as a social tool. So in order to create inside the jail another space and to leave the inmates another way to express themselves, also to trying to not to remember all the time that they are in jail, so to trying to build other ways of other bridges of communication with outside. Of course, they couldn't receive any message from outside, but the idea was then to have something that we could broadcast outside. And that was at the end. But at the beginning, the idea was not to create a documentary. I mean, we were just working together and building together a space where it was possible to speak.
Actually 2 months, and I understood that you met every week. I don't know, probably once a week, but basically 2 months sounds in general not a very long time to produce any documentary, especially the documentary with where the authors are well, in special circumstances like this. But the storytelling of your piece feels so incredibly poetic, and people online who are commenting on this piece are also noticing a lot of self-empowerment. This strengthens those voices. Could you tell us a bit more how you built a relationship with them over those 2 months? And also, did you give them any instructions to achieve this level of authenticity that sometimes even sounds like a radio play or a road movie, not so much like a project, a workshop in prison?
I think it's a result of a project where we were trying since the beginning to build a relationship between us and the inmates. So we were not focused on the radio since the beginning, but we were doing a lot of different activities, like also drawing or playing together. The jail is a really very incredible place to be, but it's also true that somehow for us that we come from outside, it's also astonishing that people inside they speak more freely. Sometimes they show their self more directly than what can happen outside. It is strange, but sometimes inside you go straight on. You meet straight on directly the person behind what they are. I mean, you can really meet persons, and that of course was something that can easy such a work. So we were meeting them just 1 hour or 1 hour and a half every week, and it was also difficult because the guard were not really happy to have us inside doing this workshop. So the time was short, but we managed doing something else, something different than radio, to build together something.
So when you realize you will do this documentary, that it will become a piece in itself, which was, I understand, part authorship of the people you spent time with and part of your team, and then you held an event to listen to the final feature that you made with them. So could you tell us a bit more about, what were the reactions from the protagonists as well as the audience in Italy?
Unfortunately, in the final event we had inside the jail, we couldn't have. We could have just one of the inmates that participated in the workshop, because a lot of them were placed in other jails, or there was one people that was not allowed to keep on the workshop because he was telling something that the guards didn't like. So unfortunately, just one of them participated in the final meeting. But the final meeting was something really interesting, because inside the jail we had half inmates, half students of the university, and all together there was a completely quiet space. That's something really not easy to have inside the jail, because inside the jail there is normally a lot of noise. And then the idea of this piece is also to not to give answers, but to give the possibility to make questions. And the interesting thing is that after the listening, there were a lot of discussion between students and inmates. So that's, I think, the most important, most interesting thing.
And also people are praising your sound design online. So I really encourage everyone who hasn't heard this piece to go on and listen to it on the website, and continue this discussion, maybe raise questions as well to you, and let's keep this conversation going about the topics or the thoughts we got after listening to this, or the style of the storytelling. So thank you, Andrea, so much. And the next piece we will talk about is by Isabel in Spain. It's a preview, the Spy Girl. It's part of the new series, Isabel, that you're launching. So this piece will be available only today, but after it airs in Spain, it will be back online, if I understand it correctly. So Isabel is independent radio producer, and your narrative podcast series that you're launching is called We Don't Talk About That. So it launches in a week. And could you tell us a bit more, maybe, if this episode, which tells the story of Rosanna and her mother during Franco dictatorship, is this typical style the series will be, with a strong narrator, dynamic pace, and one protagonist? Can you tell a bit more about the project idea?
Thank you so much. And I'm so happy to be here. Do I hear an echo, or is it me? Okay, so I'm hearing my echo. Yeah, so thanks so much. It's so amazing to be here with all these producers. The podcast is called De Eso No Se Habla. We don't talk about that. It's a sentence that many of us listen to when you grow up in Spain. I think that Spain is a country that has a big problem with silences. There's many things we don't talk about because of a strong dictatorship we had, and that was like, we're talking about politics, but not only politics, was often very dangerous, because you could get imprisoned, or you could get sanctioned, or you could get killed. So Rosanna's story is the first story. It's a very authorial story, and yeah, the pace is very intense. We decided to make the story this way because it really works as an introduction to the podcast. We have a prologue, and then we have other stories, and other stories are very different. Actually, we have a story in prison, Andrea. We should talk. We have other stories that talk about other silences. And I think this is shows the podcast well, because it really is a very strong silence that is grounded in the political scene of the 50s, but other silences are not as grounded. I really like to say normally that ours is a like historical memory podcast, but that doesn't talk about the past. It really talks about how the past influences our present. So yeah.
If I understand correctly, so this series is made for online, not for radio. Do you think, I know there is this discussion, or I don't know, we are still talking about this, should stories or narrative styles that are made for online and radio be different, or are they different? I don't know, have you thought about this?
Yeah, I think they shouldn't be different. I think good radio and good podcasting is probably the same when you listen to that's my opinion, when you listen to a very good story in radio, it's probably the same as a very good story in podcasting. I think the only difference is that in podcasting you have like time is unlimited, and that's a resource, and probably experimentation is more unlimited. For us in Spain, there's no much space for radio documentaries on the radio. So when we want to work on documentaries, we really normally have to do it online. So from the beginning, this was an online project, and we would love to be on the radio. If you know of anyone.
Yeah, so hopefully this is also contributing to some exposure that sometimes independent radio producers need, and that would be very nice. Another thing, I think someone in the comment fields mentioned, or it was a question, were you able to, or did you have access to some archive from Franco era? I think it was maybe, you know, someone suggested maybe it would have helped to create the atmosphere. Yeah.
There's two things in Spain. To have access to like national radio archives, it's very expensive. So it's 300 euros per minute plus 200 euros per sending that. I don't know how it's in other countries. So that makes that many independent people cannot use them because 1 minute is like very expensive. On the other hand, for me, this story, my goal was to make it very, very simple and very, very bare. Other stories that we have are like more, I mean, have more, a more seemingly sound production, like you can hear the sound production more. In this one, we really wanted to make a very simple story with two voices. And actually the fact that there's only one voice that's telling the story, because I read on the comments that someone was asking about the end, the last part, was actually what drove me to do the stories. Like, how come there's some stories that are not being told because people are not telling them, but also there are stories that are not being told by the protagonists and that are being told by other people. And that's even as dangerous. So for me, the fact that only one person wanted to talk about the story and there were like so many gaps in the story was really the core of the story, and it's the core of silences.
Thank you, Isabel, so much, and good luck with your series. And those who speak Spanish should follow your work, I guess, and also join the discussion on the website during this conference. And we move on to Torben from Denmark. Welcome, Torben. For some reason, I see...
This is not Torben.
This is not Torben.
This is
no.
Michael.
I can see it's Michael.
No,
oh, hello, Torben.
Me.
Hi, nice to see you. Some technical glitches, but easily resolved. So welcome, Torben. Torben is a well-known Danish senior radio documentary maker. Some of you have met him in other festivals as well. And you are editor-in-chief and producer of Radio Tales, which is a Danish feature magazine broadcast on Danish radio. And today you're presenting On the Bloody Trail of a Dane, which is a true crime series, 5-part series, which, as I understand, was an instant hit in Denmark, 500,000 downloads. My first question would be, yes, we know true crime is popular, but is it that popular? And did you expect that popularity when you went online, when you broadcasted it?
Well, I can't say we expected it, but I had great expectations to the story because it's so different from other true crimes dramas, because the guilty, the serial killer, is facing the listener directly in the program. And the two journalists behind it, Jørgen and Helle, who worked on this program or this research for many years, they appear not only as the storytellers, but also reflecting on their own reactions on being next to this guy who sounds like a guy you could meet in a wedding party or something. Nice old man telling good stories, until you start listening to what is he really telling. So I think what made it different and what it made it very successful is that you're not just facing a lot of crime, you're also put into a situation where you actually face the psychopath. And a lot of other people do that as well. And we are all asking ourselves the question, would I have seen it? And all those who met him when they were younger, etc., is asking themselves the question, why didn't we interfere? Why didn't we do something to this? And I think that all these levels in this story has made it very, a big part, of course, apart from the fact that it's a completely crazy story, even worse than the submarine story we became world famous for.
Mm. And I think people are asking themselves when, listening to a true crime story like this, also about the ethics of the producer. And I think someone also in the discussion, if I understood correctly, raised this question about this narrow line between, the role of the producer and putting a serial killer at the center stage, like you said, looking into the eyes and almost, when this line, when you question, did he do it, did he not do it, is he sympathetic, and how do I feel about this? Why am I pale after 3 days of talking to him? Your protagonists, your authors and journalists, they also are very open about this fact, about how they feel about this. I was wondering if you could tell us a bit more about these editorial decisions you were making along the way, and about your responsibility approaching this, and basically, I don't know, glorifying in a way the serial killer, if I may say so.
I certainly don't hope that we are glorifying him. That's not what I hear from our listeners. They are scared, they are shocked, and they are wondering how this could happen for such a long time before he got his 2 times life sentence in South Africa, plus 35 years. We discussed the issue of showing him. Of course, we were discussing if we were running the risk of making him a star, especially in his own eyes. And that's why it was very important for us to make sure, or we had the knowledge, that the jail in South Africa, which is underground, doesn't allow prisoners to read stories about themselves. So that was an issue we were discussing a lot. Yeah. Other issues. Yeah, of course, it was. I think we were walking a thin line, but for me, it made a lot of sense for me that we could show this level of, a psychopath who, even in the courtroom, starts talking about crimes he is not even taken to court for. I mean, that told me a lot about the nature of a person like that. And I think I learned a lot about psychopaths in this process. And I hope it's the same. A lot of my friends say, no, we don't want to see that. It's a show. This. But then they listened to it and they came back and say, well, what? That was. It has really made a big impression on them. I never heard anyone glorifying this bastard, if I may.
No, I think
so free.
What I meant is what you called making him a star. I think that's actually that's the side of it, is like putting him center stage and discussing about it. And basically, well, do you think I'm just very would be interested to know if you think other true crime producers are considering this wider question of public interest when making these stories and serializing these often grim and horrible stories, real life stories, and making them in such a nice way that sometimes people listening to them are forgetting these are true stories and this is not fiction. You know, I know this discussion also sometimes is in our conferences coming up.
I got your point. I think it's very important to differ between journalism and storytelling like this, where I mean, if you have a true crime, you have someone who is guilty, who hasn't been taken to court yet, and you kind of find the guilty, and that's the process you go through. In this case, I mean, we already had the guilty, we already had the court case. You could say that, yeah, but he committed so many other crimes that he should probably have had like 10 times lifetime. We know that's never going to happen because I don't think any, I mean, yeah, it wouldn't make sense because he's there, and I guess the Danish authorities prefer to have him in a jail in South Africa. So for me, it was, as a producer and the editor-in-chief, I was all the time discussing with Jørgen and Helle, how do we make this interesting for the common listener? How can we face all this as the humans we are and learn from it? And now I think you only listen to the first part,
yes,
right?
Only first episode, yes.
Which is a bit unfair to Jørgen and Helle, because in the second and the rest of it's altogether 5 chapters, there's a psychiatrist explaining about narcissism, etc. So that takes over from the second part. Not take over, it's not one long talk from the psychiatrist, we mix it up, and this person is analyzing each new step this man takes and try to explain how what goes on in his mind.
So yeah, I understand that basically the idea behind it was a psychological study and also a study of systemic problems, why such people get away for so many years. I really hope we can continue this discussion online, and I hope, Torben, you also will join and follow the comments, and I'm sure people have questions. It's a very interesting discussion.
It's a very important discussion.
Yeah, and it's well, we are glad we can have this, at least in this form this year in these strange times. And thank you, Torben, once again. And I say hello again to Kasia. Kasia, Michalak.
Hello. Hello, everyone. Hello.
Hi, hello, Kasia. Kasia, you may know her. She is an experienced radio producer from Polish radio in Lublin, former head of radio documentary unit here. And we can hear Kasia's piece, I Am Human Ear, which is centered around Svetlana Alexievich and her methods of work, which remind and have so much in common with our own work as radio producers. And Kasia, you say you waited for this meeting with Svetlana Alexievich for 3.5 years, almost 4 years, and you got only 2 hours with her. You must have been frustrated. How did you prepare in order to make this work for a feature? A radio feature, because I know we all spend much more time usually with our protagonists.
First of all, hello everyone, and big thank you to IFC team that you made this dream come true. Thank you very much. I must say that my motivation for this piece was very, very selfish, because all the time I search the occasion to tell listeners, to tell my colleagues, other journalists, how specific our language, our substance is. In Poland, we have now the explosion of non-fiction literature, and reporters told everything, and they were everywhere. So I ask myself, what can you add to this discussion about contemporary world through your medium, through the sound? And one day I've heard Svetlana Alexievich, and she said, there is something which can't be translated into literature. So I'm helpless. There is language, the sound of the voice. I can transform this into the literature. So I thought maybe it's our job. Of course, it's our job, and it's the gap we should fulfill as radio producers. That's why I work on this sentence. Yeah, I am a human ear. I can translate a human voice into literature. And I waited for the meeting. Of course, I imagined that I will go to Belarus. I will sit with her at her place, and I will listen to the words with her. But it couldn't happen. It was too difficult. So I had 2 hours in the hotel room, maybe less than 2 hours, because it was translated. I don't speak Russian. It was translated in both directions. Best regards for Mariana Kryl from Ukraine, who helped me. So we had this understanding. We were watching into our eyes and knew what we have in common. This struggle with how to transform the sound, the voice, into our language.
Svetlana Alexievich is talking a lot about the importance of voice, of intonation, something we also, this comes up in our discussions as well as radio feature makers. And you had to make this interview via translation. You had to produce a feature in Polish language from an interview in Russian, and had to make these decisions about using voiceover. I mean, did you have, can you tell us a bit more about your thoughts of producing this via voiceover when, you know, one of the subjects of this conversation is the intonation and the voice that unfortunately has to be, you know, this difficulties with working with the
intruder. Yeah, the translation is always the intruder, and it disturbs. So I had many possibilities, because I live in Lublin. It's not Warsaw with big theaters and great actors. So I chose who I could choose. But yeah, that's why I put these scenes with composer and Arthur Giordano, because I wanted maybe to move the accent not from only interview, but to, yeah, the meaning of our work. Sorry.
And these, no, it's okay. And these, I think these little, how to say, scenes with the composer and some of the excerpts from her speeches also give us a chance to hear her voice as well more as she speaks. Do you think this feature and some of the topics you touch upon in the interview sound slightly different or gain new and additional meaning in light of the recent events in Belarus?
I'm not sure if I understood. Could you repeat?
I mean that we at least here in our part of the world, we hear about Svetlana Alexievich as being in danger and the only free member of this committee in Belarus. She's at the heart of political events in Belarus, and she speaks about the role of journalism, especially in dictatorships and in societies in transition. So I couldn't help but you know, hear this feature in different contexts. Some of her thoughts are even more powerful, I thought, today.
Yes, of course, I think she had the message, the testimony for intellectuals in our part of Europe. Yeah, we struggle with many problems here. I don't feel comfortable to talk about this now in short words, because it's painful and it's very, yeah, moving for me. But of course, if you could hear the whole story, the fourth part of this is the message for all of us here, how not to be conformist, how not to be a traitor, how to be brave, how to stand aside when somebody wants us to push into bad ideas or dirty ideas. So I think that I maybe it's a part which not goes well with the whole story, whole structure of the piece, but it was a very important message for us.
Thank you so much, Kasia. Yeah, it was very nice to talk to you and to hear this piece in a very signature calm and very soothing in a way, but also thought-provoking. So thank you so much, and let's continue talking about this online. And I say hello again to Michael in Ireland, who is a radio producer working with the RTE. And Michael, you have background in current affairs, and the piece we have a chance to hear at this conference is your first radio documentary as part of the documentary on One Team. And it's called Death, Don't Leave It to the Last Minute. When the main protagonist is Gray, for those who haven't heard it. And she's basically, as I was listening to this, I realized it's kind of unusual situation where protagonist basically submits herself with the full story, says, come and do a story about me. This doesn't happen that often. And how, and I mean, you didn't have too much experience, but can you tell us about how you ended up being an author of this and doing this story?
Yeah, so we receive pitches from the public and freelancers each year for our seasons, as well as making our own new content. And yeah, like you said, Gray emailed us to say, would we be interested in speaking to her about her plans for what would happen if she became ill or incapable of making her own decisions. So the email came through, and it's rare that an 81-year-old will email you and say, will you make a documentary about us? And that's what we did. We went straight out, and I recorded with Gray on the first day, just to see from, I suppose, from an editorial point of view, was this going to be achievable? Was it fair for us to ask an 81-year-old to record multiple hours with us over a year? And she was completely passionate about talking about a very tough subject for many. Like in Ireland, we're really good at dealing with the aftermaths of someone dying and bringing them to a grave and what happens from the moment they take their last breath. But we're very bad at talking about the subject before it happens inevitably. And I think it was quite nice in the sense that Gray was so healthy and well that we got to explore other things in this documentary that we wouldn't have if she was unwell.
I understand that one of the goals also of this documentary, which is about, as you mentioned, how do you prepare for your death, for your own death very consciously? How do you make all these decisions? What happens to you and so on? And it's about breaking taboos. And could you tell us a bit more? I think I understood that it started, this documentary itself, it started a national discussion on the topic in some way. Correct me if I'm wrong. So what sort of taboos did you manage to break, and how do you think with this piece?
I think simply the discussion in one sense, particularly in Gray's age group of the over 65s, to discuss this. Yeah, you're right, Gray. There was a vast amount of downloads post interview and after being transmitted on RT Radio 1. But and Gray was subsequently followed on with more interviews in RT. I suppose one of the biggest taboos, I suppose, that we covered, and you heard it in the documentary, was when Gray would bring up the discussion with her friends, and a woman called Rebecca came in from the Irish Hospice Foundation in Ireland. And in the scene that you've heard, Gray has brought all her friends together to her house for what some might see as tea and coffee, but actually this was a discussion to talk to her friends about what she wanted, because I suppose she was in the situation that, and is still healthy and well, that at 81 years of age, she has no husband, no partner, no kids to look after. And and one of the hardest things to open up that dialogue was actually with our friends, because they didn't want to think of life without Gray, and they were very much, they didn't, one of them in particular didn't want to sit around that table that evening, but we got her around, and that was through the character and the and spirit of Gray that she got that there. But so that also brought on the fast reaction we got to it afterwards.
Some people are wondering about your decision. I don't know if it was your decision or your team's decision to have a different narrator. Not you. You obviously have had or developed some sort of relationship, as we all do when working for a prolonged time with our protagonists. But there's, I should say, there's quite little of you in the story. Why is that?
We decided to have another narrator to allow the story to breathe, I think is probably the best sense. It wasn't about just necessarily myself and Gray. It was really to get her to tell her story, and to breach on all the topics we wanted to within. And it also felt more ideal to have me set up as a character through a narrator. And I think we achieved that quite well. So it's just for that reason, just to bridge us into scenes, and that we liked it, and it just brought another level of contrast as well to it.
Okay, well, thank you, Michael, and good luck with your documentary work. And please listen to Michael's story along as other stories online on Conference's website. And you can also leave your impressions, your own impressions about the story in the comment fields. We're really waiting for this, and authors are as well, I think. And the next story, which is on today's playlist, is The Day I Shall Not Forget for the Rest of My Life by Đivanović. Of course, you're a freelance author and associate of the drama department there. And you are bringing us a story about Titanic disaster, which may seem like an old story, well-known story, but it's from a new angle, from a Croatian ship which took part in the Titanic's rescue. And at the center of the story is a vivid diary of a teacher, Maria, a Croatian teacher, who was on board of the Croatian ship. Can you tell us more how you came across of this diary and how the story idea developed from this?
Hello to everyone. Just in the beginning, one technical correction: Carpathia was not Croatian ship. It was it was a British ship. Cunard Line was the company that owned it, because in that time Croatia was just a little part of Austro-Hungarian Empire and practically didn't have any maritime force. The idea was, in the beginning, as we are public radio, we have to make program that in some way concerns the community as a whole. And the first idea was that we link this story to the fact that Rijeka city in Croatia became European capital of culture in 2020. And Rijeka is in many ways connected to this story. And other motivation was that in 2019, first book about this ship and this event was published in Croatia. And practically, this topic was really interesting to people because not much was known about it until then. And the author of this book, Slobodan Olković, he was our guide in photography, in historical details and stuff. He practically gave us information about this diary, this lady who was voyager on Carpathia on that day, that night when Titanic had its disaster. And we managed to get in touch with her grandson, who is still alive. He's really old, but he gave us some information, even though his health is not in the best shape and he doesn't remember everything, but he gave us some information. But he also has the diary. And we tried to, we saw that we have a story that was untold until now, and we wanted to present that story to Croatian public. Then we got in touch with other people from Carpathia. I mean, not other people, but descendants from sailors from Carpathia who were rescuing people from Titanic, and the story started there.
When Ylva, our colleague from Swedish Radio, noted in the comments that your story is really full of colors. When you hear the topic in general like this of a more than 100-year-old story, you expect maybe some read out documents and historians, but really, did you know that this story is so alive and passed from generation to generation among all those people that you managed to find and include in the story?
Yeah, as I said, in Croatia, this story was in shadow of Titanic tragedy, totally. So basically, for years, for some reason, it was considered part of maritime history of Austro-Hungarian Empire or even Great Britain. So not many people knew about this story. In some way, probably I heard it in elementary school, but that was it. And we wanted to show that because it was really exciting to us and we wanted to pay tribute to these people who were on that ship, because it's important to know that out of 306 sailors on Carpathia, 84 of sailors were from what is now Croatia. And we just wanted to pay tribute to all these people who, in some way participated in one of the most important events of the beginning of 20th century, and also to include the story of this unusual lady and really interesting woman who kept a diary during these days. And we wanted to make some kind of interesting combination of these elements, So not just to have historical feature or documentary, but to go beyond the usual historical facts and to include her, authentic testimonies and her story about her adventure, not just on Carpathia, but also in the United States, where she lived for 3 months and then decided to go back to Croatia, which was then Austro-Hungarian Empire.
Yeah, of course. Thank you so much, and please do have a listen. It's really full of pictures and colors, and let's leave your impressions online. Thank you, Đino, so much
Thank you.
for the story. And now I would like to say hi to Stephen in the
Hello.
UK. Hi, Stephen. Hello. You're a documentary feature maker and the creative director of Overcoat Media, which is an independent production company in Wales. And we hear during this conference, we can hear your story, which is titled A Racist Music. It's about infamous racist American composer John Powell. And as I understand, since you have this background in music program production and arts features, probably you knew about him.
Well, it's quite interesting because I came across the story about 2 years ago, and actually I hadn't really come across this guy, and it was, as you say, my background is in classical music radio. I'm still one of quite very few non-white producers working in classical music radio in the UK still, which is I think one of the issues the program is sort of looking at, and I was really surprised I didn't know this guy, especially when you realise through listening to the program this guy really was big news in America in the first few decades of the 20th century. I mean, his Rhapsody Negra, which the program looks into, was actually the most popular piano concerto before Gershwin's Rhapsody in Blue. It was the most performed, and the idea that I was fascinated really by. Fascinated and kind of disgusted by what he stood for and how he had used classical music, which is often seen as one of the really high art forms. We think of Mozart and Bach and these composers that elevate our world, and to see classical music be used for such despicable ideas was really fascinating, and I wanted to tell that story. And I was also interested in the idea of what you do with somebody like that. It felt like he'd been airbrushed out of history. And I wanted to sort of look at that and to sort of examine what the kind of ethics were around that.
Yeah, and it's not precisely the documentary about him as much as it is about various issues, as you mentioned, this cultural racism and things like that. It's still fairly rarely discussed today, I guess, judging also from the comments online. Many people were surprised, and sort of it makes you think again completely differently about classical music as such, and who decides what composers will learn and things like that. And of course, issues of diversity and representation that you mentioned in audio industry as well has been a discussion for a while now. And you say that by making this piece, it was interesting for you to also try and find ways not only to tell in terms of subject of our stories, but also in terms of how we approach those stories, how we tell them, and the tensions we as audio makers might face in doing so. Can you tell us a bit more about those tensions that you perhaps experienced while working on this?
Definitely. I really went on a bit of a journey personally with this program. I'm mixed race myself. My dad was from Sri Lanka. I've mentioned before that there are very few people of a non-white background working in classical music radio, and I still, as you mentioned, I think this is a problem for our whole industry across audio. And when I first had the program commissioned from the BBC, I think the questions that we were initially really interested in looking at were questions like, can you separate the art from the artist? And the more that I went, the more I started to make the program, I began to really feel that that was a bit of an old question, that we've had those debates a lot with figures like Wagner in music. There are many other figures in literature, in visual arts. And it increasingly felt to me that these were kind of quite philosophical questions, when the structural racism that still is having a huge effect on people today. And so whilst I wanted to examine those questions, I really wanted to bring it into focus by by including the experiences of young non-white musicians, and you hear them in the program. And it was a journey for me, because I think of myself as pretty, with my own background and my own interests, I think of as being pretty liberal, pretty, woke, as people say these days. But actually, I used the services of a fantastic researcher, Tejal Adelaide, who's a Black British researcher, fantastic musician, and she just very gently brought me round to this thinking that actually the question isn't really an abstract one about just an abstract one about the notes on the page. It's about how this affects people now, and how classical music, whilst it may not be overtly racist in the way that Powell tried to put forward, the structures of it are still holding back people, and there are ways in which racism plays out in classical music and actually in all aspects of our world that we don't even notice. And it's not about, it's simply trying to kind of understanding the context of that, I think.
Yeah, it's not so much about personalities as much about systems or structures, like you say, and it's much wider than that. And actually, it's a good time to mention that we have a panel as well as part of this conference about diversity in production in European public service by Tiziano Bonini from University of Siena, which will be online, or is online, I think, producing diversity in the European public service. So please make sure also to check that out and listen to this. Thank you, Stephen, so much. Very thought-provoking, interesting piece for sure, and thanks a lot. And let's continue talking about this. And the final piece that we are discussing today is from Emelie from Sweden. Gamer. It's a series. I don't know if is it true crime series or are we still learning what it is? More like investigative journalism series, and episode 1, Murder Plan. Emelie, you are an award-winning investigative reporter with the Swedish Broadcasting Corporation, and this was obviously a complex investigation about the online world, online gaming world, which is a world of teenagers, and what happens or can go horribly wrong when adults are not paying attention, if I can summarize like that. You mentioned, I think in the beginning, that you knew about these issues before taking on this story, but you were reluctant to proceed. So can you tell us a bit more why? Obviously, this is not an easy topic, but why did you not want to do it in the beginning? Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. Hi, everybody. It's a bit of an embarrassment, actually, because I mean, I think all of us want to be brave when taking on new subjects. And I think it's very important to work on subjects and with people that aren't usually represented in media. And therefore, I worked on a lot of stories with youth and children with their voices at the center. And then when several children and teenagers have told me about things they've experienced online and in gaming communities and how that has affected some other event happening in real life, I've listened to those stories, but then moved on with what I was working on right now at that point. And I was having that bad conscience about that. And I think I didn't pay enough attention initially, because at least in Sweden, I'm not sure if it's a common thing in your countries, but in Sweden, we've had a lot of like moral panic debates about how video games will make you really violent and ruin your world. And I think I was afraid to be drawn into that debate when that it would be hijacked by that, when this really was about, as I understood, the kids. What happens when we are left alone, when no one really takes an interest in what we are experiencing. But when I heard that one more time after one other really severe occasion, I felt, okay, this is enough. Now I really have to work on this. And the turning point for me was when I got in touch with Victor in the series, and he asked me for help, literally asked me for help to tell adults about this. I was like, I have to work on this now.
So part of the story was known already. So this accident, attempted murder, and you were bringing new details as a result of your 1 year spending in these online forums, and also doing a survey of 1,000 children of what is it all about, right? So so what was the the key insight for you after all this? And I don't know, maybe if you could tell us how did you cope with all this I don't know, specific negative racist, sexist atmosphere that you had to put yourself through? Did you get any help yourself? I believe you had to in one way or another, because this can have emotional toll also for you as well.
I've been debriefing with my editor all along, and then also, of course, worked very closely with the producer Ylva Lindgren at the Swedish Broadcasting Corporation. But then I think for me, it's kind of a protection to work on these issues as a journalist. I mean, that's a lens, or how to it's makes you feel that you're actually doing something on the subjects rather than feeling, I don't know, a sense of helplessness maybe. And for me, I mean, the kids' stories that they wanted to share, that was for me the power to keep on working. And the core point would probably be what also Victor says in the last episode. I understand adults if it's hard to grasp everything going on in the online world if you're not part of it yourself, but at least show that you care and show that you're interested. Because I mean, kids will, I mean, shit will happen everywhere. It's not specific to the gaming world or online world. But if you as an adult don't try to understand that part of your kid's reality, then it gets really hard, many people told me, to bring up the problems. Because if your parents, for example, don't understand how wonderful the gaming world can be, how can you then trust them that if you bring up all the problems you also face, that they won't only say like, okay, enough, you will not spend any more time there. And for me, that was a core issue. And then, of course, the other part that's more the investigative part with all the flaws and misconduct in other parts of the society, not really getting this, the police don't investigate this properly, and the prosecutor don't understand the platforms properly, the platforms don't take the responsibility properly. But I mean, these steps that I investigated, that was part of the journey for helping actually the kids to tell the story because they really wanted to.
Yeah, so it's also about not one particular case or separate cases, but also about systemic issues like we talked earlier, talking about other stories. So thank you, Emelie, so much. Thank you, everyone, for being here and for talking to us, for sharing details about your work. And please, everyone else who is taking part in this unusual, because it's virtual, but also I have the sense that it's also bigger than ever conference, IFC 2020 this year. Let's continue this constructive, friendly, helpful discussion online in designated fields. And I hope you stay with us for the next 2 days, not only for screenings and listening sessions, but also for the special videos and of the day that our colleagues have prepared for everyone. And thank you for now. Bye from me, and I hope to see you alive and well next year in the next IFC. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.